There are going to be good weapons that don't make it to this list, so if your favorite weapon isn't on here, don't get mad at me. I don't hate your favorite weapon. You should continue to like it if you do enjoy playing with it. You shouldn't be going on the internet to seek validation anyway. But if you did want to know my opinions on the weapons that don't make it to this list, just let me know down in the comments below and we can have a discussion there. Now, the reason why we're doing a top 25 and not like ranking all 100 new weapons is because I guarantee as soon as I get done ranking all the weapons, there'll be like a balancing update like a couple days from now that's going to change everything and I'm going to have to do it again. So to save myself from having to do it twice, we're just going to do a top 25 for today. And as for the criteria, once again, it's going to be how useful a weapon is in PvE. Please remember this, based on usefulness. So if a weapon is outclassed by something in the base game or throughout this DLC, it's more than likely not going to be on this list. And also I have noticed that only 11% of you... I'm kidding, let's just get started. Starting up at number 25, the ANSBACH'S longbow. Not sure if I'm saying that name correct, but this bow is probably going to be the best one in the entire game. It is a medium bow with the exact same moveset as a light bow, so therefore it is going to get the jumping, landing, and rolling attacks. So it is very comparable to the black bow that works the exact same way, but it actually is going to get more damage and gets a really good skill in fan shot. For 12 FP, you just shoot out 8 arrows at once in a nice horizontal spread, and yes, they just do incredible damage. And if you're using status effect arrows, it's just going to proc the statuses really quickly. Now, typically when making bow types of builds, you actually need to have statuses just to make them viable, but you don't even need status effects at all when using this weapon skill. It is actually going to be that good. And also in this DLC, there's going to be a couple new talismans that just further enhance your damage of bows. And that's going to stack with all the stuff that you already get in the base game. And bow builds can now just be very viable, especially with this one here. The only downside being is that you will have to purchase lots of arrows. Number 24, the ANVIL hammer. I was like really close to not putting this on the list because I was convinced that the eruption skill with the colossal weapon is just going to be better than this, but it does have some things going for it. Now, yes, as I mentioned, it is going to be a colossal weapon, does get a very good strength and faith-based scaling, and your total AR can just be amazing. Like, this thing can outdamage almost anything else in the entire game. It is going to be on the heavier end. It doesn't really get the most amount of range compared to some other colossal weapons. It does get on the higher end in terms of stance damage for the heavy attack at 45. For some reason, all colossal weapons tend to have like different values when it comes to their charged heavy attacks and stance damage. Like, no other class does this but colossal weapons. I don't really know why. But as for its weapon skill, smithing art spears, for 18 FP, you do a nice close range AoE attack that has a lot of hyper armor, does do some nice damage, and does 45 stance damage. Now, this skill is very comparable to Eruption, like identical animation. Difference being is that this one like shoots out spears, whereas Eruption shoots out a bunch of lava. Now, Eruption is going to do more damage, and now that we have the Talisman of the Dread to boost magma-based sources, it's just going to do way more damage than smithing out spears ever could, and it's going to consume less FP. Now, however, it is going to be doing less stance damage than smithing art spears. It only does 25 compared to the smithing art spears 45, and that lava effect is only going to scale of things like faith or strength depending on your build, whereas the anvil hammer does actually scale of AR, so at higher levels it could potentially do just as much damage too. Number 23, the Sword of Light. This is a holy based straight sword, which does get very bad scalings, a C in strength and a D in faith. Its weapon skill also does horrendous damage for a really long animation that you can get staggered out of incredibly easily. Doesn't even go that far as well. Yeah, the weapon as a primary option just kind of sucks. However, the skill Light for 30 FP is actually going to serve as a holy body buff, which is actually peak. We finally have a specific buff for holy damage. To where now, if you actually wanted to go through the base game again, it is going to be a lot more smooth of an experience. Because yes, this is actually going to be a 20% boost for 1 minute, which is just as much as a damage boost as Flame Grant Me Strength, but it actually lasts twice as long. And yes, don't worry, it's a body buff, so it is going to stack with things like Golden Vow. And it does have a 24 faith requirement, which is very similar to Golden Vow. So you don't really have to spec into many points just to benefit either. And yes, if you did want to know, it is going to stack with things like the Sword of Darkness. This weapon skill actually does serve as a holy debuff, which is also going to be 20%. That's also going to last a minute. Not going to value that one as much as the Sword of Lights though, because body buffs are just inherently going to be more useful. Whereas for debuffs, you have to individually apply it to every enemy. Number 22, the Fire Knight's Greatsword. Now yes, this weapon is extremely popular right now due to it being bugged in PvP, but in PvE, it is still very good. It is going to be the best faith-based colossal sword in the game. Can actually get the most damage with a faith infusion compared to all the other colossal swords. Now in terms of every other infusion, it's not going to do as well. However, this one does just get the best moveset out of all the colossal swords too. It gets the Godslayer's Greatsword light attack combo combined with a Zweihänder heavy, which that means that you're just going to get faster light attack combos and a poking attack. That's everything that you really need when it comes to this weapon, just combined into one neat little package. Now, the fact that it is doing that split fire damage isn't going to really help, and it's going to make it that other weapons are just going to out damage it. Specifically when it comes to strength-based builds, even with the faster moveset that it does have, it is not going to out DPS some of the other options because the moveset isn't that much faster. It's only by like a few frames. But when it comes to a faith-based weapon, it's not going to really get much better than this one. Number 21, the Flowerstone Gavel. We were so close to getting our first Faith Arcane weapon, but unfortunately we fell a bit short. Yeah, this thing is going to be a Strength Arcane weapon, is going to be a hammer, does get pure physical damage, actually does do piercing damage, which as I say religiously, it is the best damage type in the entire game. A lot of enemies are weaker to it, and counterattack damage exists. It is going to get the regular hammer moveset, which is perfectly fine, and its weapon skill, Flower Dragon Bolt for 18 FP, just shoots out a lightning projectile that tracks straight towards the enemy. So yeah, they're kind of not going to be able to dodge it, they're just going to get hit every single time. You can fully charge it to make it do even more damage, and best of all yet, it actually does debuff enemies to make them take 12% more lightning damage. Now, the unfortunate part about this weapon is that it doesn't really get synergy with like anything. You have to like go out of your way to make a certain different type of build just to make it synergize or something, because the weapon actually doesn't get split lightning damage. So the only way you're going to benefit off that debuff is if you spam the skill, spec into a faith build or spec into a dexterity build to use either the spells or some of the other weapons. You can use some of like the Bale incantations because they also do split lightning damage. But that's kind of like the only synergy you really have with your Strength Arcane build. Like, yes, I'm just going to address it. If it had a Faith scaling, it would just be a better weapon. I'm sure there's like some amazing lore reason as to why it's going to have an Arcane scaling. But if it just had a Faith scaling, and also if it had split lightning damage, it would be better. That means the skill would have better synergy with the weapon and with other types of spells. And also just feels like a waste of points into Arcane as well, because the skill does scale off Arcane, and at these higher levels of Arcane, I'm also benefiting off faster status effect buildup, but I'm not using a status effect weapon, so also just feels like I'm wasting stats. Now obviously I'm a person that likes to min-max and optimize the builds, so like that's the direction that my head goes when I think about this weapon. But if you don't care about those things, as a standalone weapon, it's perfectly fine and it is very good. Number 20, the Spear of the Impaler. Now, I did just touch on this weapon yesterday when I talked about the boss weapon ranking list, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. It is a weapon that gets very high damage with its skill. It is a great spear of which they do get some very nice amounts of poise damage. The heavy attack, I do not like. It is going to be a projectile that does not do much damage, consumes a lot of stamina, only does like 9 stance damage, which is very upsetting because heavy attacks tend to be like the only way to proc stance breaks quickly, especially when you use a skill that's just meant for high damaging attacks. It actually does get a very good dexterity and faith-based scaling. So at higher levels, you can definitely just decimate bosses when landing the entire skill combo. Now it is going to be a longer animation that doesn't get much hyper armor. So against certain types of bosses, they're just not going to let you get it off. But if they do, then it's kind of a GG. Number 19, LEDA'S sword. Now, this one might be a little bit of my bias creeping in because it's like one of my favorite weapons in the DLC. Not because it's like good or anything, but because it just looks so cool. And like I like holy damage aesthetically speaking. But it still is deserving of being top 25. It is a light greatsword of which they have like the smoothest moveset in the entire game. Good combos between the light and heavy attacks. The jumping attacks flow nicely. They do very nice amounts of stance damage too. And they're like the perfect weapons to pair alongside the multi-hit talismans. You can just output a lot of DPS with these things. Now this is going to be a split holy damaging light greatsword with a faith and dexterity scaling. Unfortunately, it doesn't scale that well with faith. I don't know why they just didn't give it like a B in both dexterity and faith. There are lots of weapons that have double B scalings. Why couldn't this one? It would have made it so much better. Please, FromSoft. But its skill, Needle Piercer for 19 FP, just shoots out a bunch of these holy projectiles that track towards the enemy. They go pretty far. It is going to be very hard to dodge as well. And at point blank range, you are going to hit with the weapon directly, of which the entire combo can do some nice damage, does a total of 10 stance damage, and it does scale off AR, so you can just go all into dexterity to just maximize your damage. You don't necessarily have to go into faith. Now, the major benefit of this skill is going to be its ease of use. Like with how quick it is to cast, how easy it is to hit an enemy is going to be its major benefit. Like any single time you see an enemy just like back away from you, just use the skill until they eventually come close, then you can just use the sword itself. But the major drawback is going to be the fact that it is just lacking damage. The total amount of AR is not that high. The weapon skill could use it with a bit of a damage buff. But yeah, all these things could just be fixed if it just gave it like a B scaling in faith. Number 18, DANE'S Footwork. Now this is going to be one of 2 hand-to-hand weapons, the other one being the Dryleaf Arts. I actually do prefer this one better. The difference being is that this one does get more kicking attacks, the other one gets more fist-based combat. Now if you did want like a little bit more of a breakdown, the Dane Footwork actually does get more stance damage on your light attacks, whereas the Dryleaf actually does get more stance damage on your charged heavy attacks, which typically I do prefer more, but there are going to be 2 more things that the Dane's Footwork actually has going for it. One is going to be its synergy with the Shattered Stone Talisman. That is just going to boost the damage of all of your kicking attacks by 10%, so that is just going to equal more damage with the DANE'S footwork, and it also just hits twice with a guard counter. I went over it yesterday in my top 5 builds video, and it might potentially just be a bug, but this thing literally just hits twice, whereas the Dry Leaf Arts only hits once, so this is literally doing 40 stance damage and twice as much damage on a guard countering attack. But in terms of the movesets of hand-to-hand weapons themselves, they can be pretty good. They're nice and quick. They can help proc the multi-hit talismans. In most cases, I'm not going to like them more than fist-based weapons. These things just do more damage, higher DPS, more stance damage. But the major thing they do have going for them is going to be some of their weapon skill options. They do get Dry Leaf Whirlwind and Palm Blast. Dry Leaf Whirlwind can actually stunlock smaller enemies and do some nice amounts of damage. Now, Palm Blast, I think, is going to be the better option. This thing is just a high damaging attack, does about 33 stance damage, and just has infinite hyper armor. You like never get staggered out of this thing, and it could just be a guaranteed attack. Now, when fighting these DLC bosses that hit super duper hard and move really quickly, probably not going to be the most useful skill, but against almost everything else in the game, it definitely is. Number 17, the Dragon Hunter's Great Katana. Now, yes, this being a Great Katana, one of the new classes, they're very comparable to curved greatswords in terms of their speeds and damage. Curved greatswords might just have higher DPS. They also do get faster heavy attacks too, but the benefit of the Great Katanas is going to be their moveset and the fact that they all get passive bleed. Their movesets are just incredible. They get nice mix-ups of vertical, poking, and horizontal swipes. With that heavy attack, it just swings really far, of which you can hit multiple enemies at once very easily. And those poking attacks can combo in after every single move, and these can have very nice amounts of range. And with how fast some poking attacks actually can come out, it can result in very quick stun locks. Now for the Dragon Hunter in particular, this is just going to be a quality-based Great Katana. Doesn't get scalings in anything else, so it's not going to get good synergy with spells. We can't improve that blood loss build-up that it does get. But its skill, Dragon Wound Slash for 18 FP, is going to do a quick slashing attack that can do some nice amounts of damage. You can fully charge it to turn into a projectile that can make it do even more damage and actually do some decent stance damage. At point blank range, it can do 33 stance, the projectile doing 17. Now when paired alongside things like the Shard of Alexander and the Godfrey's Icon, it can do some nice damage, but it's not going to be like groundbreaking damage. There are a lot of other skills in this game that can just hit a lot harder than this, even when you're using those things against dragons too, because yes, this thing does get bonus damage against dragons. But the major benefit of this weapon is going to be its ease of use. Like, you get lots of hyper armor, it's a quick projectile, it does physical damage, it's not that expensive, it's easy to build around, it's just a solid weapon. Number 16, Death Knight's Twin Axes. This is a paired axe that does get split lightning damage, also gets a strength and faith-based scaling. Thank the Lord we finally have a faith lightning weapon. Now in terms of the weapon itself, I despise power stance axe combos. They're just horrendous. There is no other way to say it. Probably not the worst moveset in the game. I've seen worse. But there is next to no redeeming factors about this moveset. It's slow. They hit one after the other, of which that is going to result in longer animations and really bad DPS. And this is true for like every single one of its attacks. Light attacks, heavy, jumping, rolling attacks. None of them hit simultaneously and all have long animations. And these things get like a little bit more than like straight sword damage. And when you look at things like straight sword and curved sword movesets, those power stancing combos hit at the same time and they're just much quicker. Now it's obviously still going to be viable. It's not like the combo is not going to work or not going to do good damage. It can work. But the reason why it's going to be in the top 25 is obviously because of its skill, Blink Bolt Twin Axe. For 8 FP, you do a Blink Bolting attack, which is like an Ashura in this game. But you do get the option of a follow-up Spinning Lightning attack for only an additional 10 FP. And this attack can do 30 stance damage, stun lock enemies, proc the multi-hit talismans, and just result in high amounts of damage in general. It is a very solid skill, and it is very fun to use. Like, just being able to iframe dodge close to the enemy, then hit them with a spinning attack is very satisfying. Now, this whole spin can be somewhat of a longer animation. You do lunge very far, so sometimes you can just go past the enemy. But in terms of the damage, the stance damage, the fact that you get an inherent iframe dodge, it's definitely deserving of being in the top 25. Number 15, this SMITHSCRIPT shield. Now, the main reason this is going to get this high on the list is primarily because of a bug. If it wasn't for that bug, it'd probably still be at the top 25, but probably just a bit lower on the list. But yeah, this is going to be just a small shield. I wouldn't ever block with it because it sucks as a shield. But the benefit is going to be its skill, Discus Hurl, for only 3 FP and barely like any stamina. You do this really quick throwing attack that has a little bit of a delayed effect. And having a delayed effect means that enemies are just not going to be able to dodge it. And it's just going to hit every single time. And the damage can be really good, especially when paired alongside the Shard of Alexander and the Smithing Talisman. And for only 3 FP, you can't go wrong. Now, the bug comes into play when you have your weapon buffed. Like, when your main weapon is buffed, it also adds a buff onto the shield. So you can put on something like Royal Knight Resolve in your main hand, and then throw the shield, and it's going to be doing 80% more damage every single time until the buff wears off. And yeah, the gameplay is pretty much just speaking for itself. For how easy it is to use and how cheap it is for this much damage, yeah, it shouldn't really be a thing. Number 14, the Great Katana. Just the regular, basic Great Katana. Now, I already talked about the moveset when I talked about the Dragon Hunter, so I'm not going to go into that again. But the reason why I like this one better is because you can infuse it. So it gets a lot more versatility, and there are lots of skills that are very well paired alongside a Great Katana. Because you can get everything for like all swords, all poking attacks, even some of like the smaller based skills. And with how large and heavy hitting this weapon actually can be, and the fact that it does do bleed, certain skills can just make for very broken combinations. Now, there is going to be a unique skill in overhead stance that is specific to the Great Katana. It's not going to be the most amazing skill, but the fact that it does give you a stance and an option to do one attack or a triple slamming attack is going to be very good. It can help you proc those status effects very quickly. Not going to do the most amazing amount of stance damage, but you can't really go wrong with it. Number 13, the Red Bear's Claw. Now, out of all the beast claws, I think this one is the best. Well, there's only two, but the reason why I like this one better is because its skill that it gets is just better than anything that you can really get on the regular beast claw. Even if you include the fact that this cannot be infused and you can't buff it either, I'd still rather have it, because when I look at the regular beast claws, there's never really an instance of which I'd like to use it over like a regular claw, because those can just get much higher DPS. They do get these very quick running attacks. They can lunge very far and have a bunch of movement, so it might make them more useful in something like PvP. But in a PvE setting, I think that claws are just going to outclass them, and I only really use them because they're just more fun. But when it comes to the Red Bear's Claw though, this one is honestly amazing because its skill, Red Bear Hunt, is very high damaging, has very good stun lock potential, to the point where almost every single smaller enemy is just going to get a guaranteed 3-hit combo with this thing. It's only 8 FP, and the entire combo can proc bleed very quickly and only consume 24 FP. Now, it's not going to have any hyper armor. It actually is going to consume a lot of stamina, but the total overall damage output and bleed buildup definitely makes it worth it. Number 12, the Sword of Night. Every single FromSoft DLC has to have like that super edgy katana, and for Elden Ring, we have the Sword of Night. This is going to be a pure dexterity scaling katana, does get a little bit of split magic damage. The total overall damage is comparable to something like the Hand of Millennia, obviously going to have a lot less range and a bit less blood loss build up. It does get the Serpent Bone Blade heavy attack in that cool double swipe, which is very good, especially when it comes to proccing the multi-hit talismans. But I feel like I would rather have the poking attack heavy instead, because it would have been better for variety, because its skill, Witching Hour Slash, already does a bunch of horizontal swipes. Now, the skill is going to be the best part about the weapon. It actually is extremely powerful. I've been having people tell me that it's like kind of weak and underpowered. I don't really see that. I think it's very solid. For 21 FP, you do this like quick triple slashing attack that can do upwards of 130 bleed buildup, does do 14 stance damage. And this attack can stagger those larger enemies, can stun lock them, and can help proc the multi-hit talismans. But this is definitely going to be best when you have it fully charged, because it obviously is going to do more damage, is going to lunge further. It still does the same 130 bleed build-up, which is kind of disappointing. You also don't get any hyper armor throughout the entire animation, but it does do twice as much stance damage at 27. But I think the most underrated part about this is going to be the fact that it can lunge before you use it. I think a lot of people are going to try and use it like throughout a combo or when they see their first opening. But to make it work, your positioning has to be more important than anything else. Because if you can find the right times to use it, this thing can trivialize so many different types of encounters and a lot of different boss fights too. And for those shorter types of openings, you can just use the uncharged version, because it is still going to do the same blood loss build up and still stun lock. And it still is very spam friendly because it is only 21 FP. And even if you didn't have the time to use the skill, you still have a katana. It's still going to get a good moveset, get some nice range, get blood loss build up. And also this weapon actually can bypass shields, which in PvE, not going to be the most useful thing, but it's still going to be a use. Number 11, the Backhand Blades. Now, this is going to be one of the new weapon classes in this game, and I consider this one to be the best one. In almost every single infusion, this one is just going to get the most amount of damage, and it's just going to get the best moveset too. The SMITHSCRIPT Soke is probably going to get more damage with like elemental types of infusions, but even then, I'd probably rather have the Backhanded Blade for its better moveset, because it does get access to that really good heavy attack and a better jumping heavy attack too. Now, the moveset of these Backhanded Blades, for the most part, are just going to be outclassed by curved swords. Power Sensor curved swords are just incredible when it comes to the light attacks, jumping and running attacks that is hit so many times, and this can result in very broken builds. But the major benefit of Backhanded Blades is going to be, one, that heavy attack that I mentioned is going to be a lot better than a regular power stance heavy attack that curved swords get, because they don't really get one. But the main reason is going to be the unique Ash of War options they do get. They don't get anywhere near as many Ash of War options as curved swords, but thankfully they do get two unique ones in Swift Slash and Blind Spot. Now, both of these are just S tier options in PvE. Now, yes, I know that Swift Slash is very broken in PvP at the moment, but it still is very good in a PvE setting. Now, I do prefer a blind spot a little bit more because that iframe dodge is so incredibly easy to pull off. It's basically instant iframes and does really decent damage for not much FP. Like, you can cheese so many different types of encounters just by spamming this one skill. And in combination with its quick moveset, nice lunging heavy attack, you have yourself a very good weapon. Number 10, the Black Steel Greathammer, which great hammers in this game are amazing. They get some of the highest poise damage, really quick attacks, they get striking damage, get a good variety of moveset too. Now for the Black Steel Great Hammer in particular, it is going to be a split strength faith based weapon. Does get split holy damage too. And the unique thing about it is that you can infuse it. So when doubling down into a faith based infusion, it can make for one of the better faith weapons, but you also can just go into a strength infusion and benefit that way too. Now it's probably not going to be a better option over something like the Great Stars, but this thing does have a very specific use in the fact that it does get a unique guard counter attack, and the guard counter does leave a little holy AoE afterwards, which is going to do some nice damage and help push the guard counter potential to over 48 stance damage, which is just really high. And now with the new deflect tier in this game, you can make very broken builds as I did in yesterday's video. And yeah, this is just going to be one of the best weapons in this DLC. Number 9, the Poisoned Hand. If you do have an arcane build, you will benefit of having the Poisoned Hand as a part of it. Doesn't matter what weapons you're running, what build it is, as long as you're spec'd into some arcane, I recommend just putting on the Poisoned Hand as well. The reason being is because it can proc deadly poison so incredibly fast. So you can just use this at the start of every single boss fight, immediately proc deadly poison. And the passive effect of this weapon as well is that when you do proc poison on a nearby enemy or to yourself, you're going to just get a damage boost. It is going to be a 7.5% damage boost for the next 20 seconds. And that is going to stack with the Kindred of Rot and the Mushroom Crown. Now you don't need to use those two other items, but the fact that you can just like punch something, instantly proc poison in most cases, and then switch back to your main weapons is going to be its selling point. But the funniest thing is that even as a primary based option, it still is amazing. It's a fist weapon of which does get the same moveset as the Star Fist and Iron Ball, of which if you know about those weapons, they get such incredibly fast charged heavy attacks that do very good stance damage. Every single one of these heavies is going to be 33 stance damage, and there's so many items in this game that can boost the damage of this stuff. And when using all the buffs that I talked about after proccing poison, your heavy attacks can just be insane. Now the heavy attack build is probably not going to be as good as something like the Star Fist, and it also is going to have the same like abysmal range, but the fact that you can just benefit off using this with any single type of arcane build is going to be the best part about it. Number 8, Milady. Now this is obviously a light greatsword of which these weapon classes get an incredible light attack and heavy attack combo that just flows so flawlessly between one another. They can help proc the multi-hit talismans really nicely, and there's never really a point in the entire combo where I feel like I'm stuck in like a longer animation. And they just do get some very decent stance damage with their heavy attacks. Like they can do just as much stance damage with a charged heavy attack as a regular greatsword, but obviously it's just going to be faster and a nice double swiping attack. Now another good thing about these weapons is that they get amazing weapon skill options. There's so many things that you can equip onto a light greatsword. Now most of these options are just going to be better paired with other types of weapons that can just get more damage. But one thing that is going to be unique to the light greatswords is wing stance, and this skill is incredible as well. You go into a stance of which you get the option of a triple swinging attack with a light that can do 18 stance damage, or a very good lunging attack with the heavy that does do 30 stance damage. And the best part about it is that you can combo in both together. You can go light into the heavy, and that entire combo is doing almost 50 stance damage. Now yes, you're not going to be getting any hyper armor throughout the animation, but with how quick they attack and how far they can actually lunge, it's not going to be that risky either. Number 7, the Ancient Meteoric or Greatsword. This is a colossal weapon of which does get a split strength and arcane scaling, does get a bit of magic damage too. It also does share the same moveset as the Zweihander, meaning that it is going to get to that nice poking attack heavy, which means that it's going to lunge really far, be pretty quick, and gets piercing damage. But yes, the best part about the weapon is going to be its skill White Light Charge. For 10 FP, you just like run from one side of the earth to the other in this nice poking attack that doesn't really do much damage, but the follow-up attack for 25 FP does this nice explosion that does very high amounts of damage. And yes, it does scale off AR, so you can just go all into strength to this benefit of this AoE explosion. You don't necessarily have to go into arcane, but this AoE just does so much damage, and it can just help hit multiple enemies at once. And the fact that it does it after a quick like running lunge as well is going to be really good, because you don't have to worry about running towards an enemy and risk having them attack you before you even get to them. There are some problems with like the hit detection. Sometimes it feels like it just misses the AoE, even though I feel like it should have connected, and it can be a bit on the expensive side at 35 FP, but the damage is well worth it. Number 6, the MESSMER's Soldier's Spear. This is finally another great spear that can be infused, added to the game. We only have one other one in the Lance, and this one is just better. So this is officially the best Great Spear that can be infused. Now, Great Spears themselves are just amazing weapon classes. Obviously, it does piercing damage. I've already glazed it enough, so I don't need to go into all that, but it does do nice stance damage. They can stagger very nicely. The power stancing combos can be really good as well. But the reason why the MESSMER Soldier Spear is better than the Lance is because it can just get more damage in most infusions outside of strength. And even with the strength build, I'd probably still rather have the MESSMER Spear because it does get the Tree Spear heavy attack in that nice double poke. This fully charged attack can just do so much damage. Does do the same stance damage as all the other Great Spears, but it can make for some of the most powerful charged heavy attack builds, especially if you combo in that follow-up heavy attack too. This one is also just as powerful. Like the first swing just like stun locks them to where like the second attack is just guaranteed. And this like follow-up attack can just lunge really far. And also Great Spears are going to be like the heaviest and hardest hitting out of all the polearm weapons. So with a lot of different types of polearm Ashes of War, Great Spears are just going to be the best pairing, which just only helps the MESSMER Soldier Spear. Number 5, the Death Knight's Longhaft Axe. Yeah, this is the shit right here. I like this weapon. It is going to be a strength and faith-based great axe, does get split lightning damage, which is amazing. Is going to share the same moveset as the Crescent Moon Axe, meaning it's going to get that nice horizontal swiping heavy attack, which can hit multiple enemies at once. And great axes did just get buffed to where their charged heavies just do more damage now. But the best part about the weapon is obviously going to be its skill, Blink Bolt Long-Hafted Axe, which is just going to reskin the Blink Bolt Ash of War, but just give it like a secondary follow-up option, of which just slams the weapon onto the ground, and a very high damaging attack that can do 32 stance damage. Now this whole jumping animation you can get staggered out of, but if you time your attacks correctly, and if you time your dodge correctly, because yes, Blink Bolt does give you an iframe dodge, you can just close in the distance instantly and just slam right in front of the enemy in this amazing AoE attack. And you can go ahead and Blink Bolt back into safety again and then run back in and fuck them up. It's just great. Like 21 FP for the entire combo too. You can't go wrong. It's just an amazing weapon. Number 4, the FALX. This is going to be one of 3 paired curve swords in this DLC. Don't know why they decided to add 3 paired curve swords when they could have made these things backhanded blades, but that doesn't matter because this weapon is, yeah, it's really good. Obviously going to get the power stance and curve sword moveset, which is just probably the best power stance combo in the game. Incredible light attacks. Those jumping and running attacks are just busted. They just hit so many times and just do colossal damage. And on top of that, this weapon just gets bleed. So that's just going to result in even more damage. Now, yes, things like the Power Stance Bandit's Curve Sword or the Scavenger's Curve Sword are just going to perform better when it comes to these combos. But the FALX gets a unique skill in Revenge's Blade. For 15 FP, you do this nice running attack that you can fully charge to close in the distance really quickly in this nice damaging slashing attack that only consumes 15 FP. And best of all yet, you can do a follow-up attack for only 10 FP that does this whole like swiping attack that just stun locks these smaller enemies, procs bleed so incredibly fast, and just does stupid amounts of damage. Like you pair this alongside the multi-hit items, Godfrey's Icon, Shard of Alexander, everything is just dying. Even if you go up against a boss that doesn't give you an opening long enough, one, if you position yourself correctly and actually charge in there with the skill, you can just use the follow-up input as your initial attack when you do have your opening, and more likely than not, it's going to work. And even if it didn't work, you could just use a light attack combos, because it's a power stance curve sword that gets bleed. There's like virtually no way to mess up with this weapon. Number 3, the Claws of Night. Now, as I talk about a bunch of times, the Claw weapon class is just one of the best. It outputs probably the highest DPS in the entire game. And all these things get status effects, of which they can proc them just as fast. They also do get higher crit damage as well, which all those things are just as true for the Claws of Night. It is going to be a pure dexterity scaling type of weapon. Does get passive bleed, does get 110 crit, does get the same really good light attack combos that the other Claws get. Now, the heavy attacks are going to be throwable projectiles, of which the damage is just not that good. I wouldn't really care to use the heavy attacks that much. The light attacks are going to serve you perfectly fine, but the broken thing about this weapon is going to be its skill, Scattershot Throw, which typically you can only equip this onto the throwing blades, which throwing blades don't really get that high of AR, but claws, they can get a lot higher AR, of which is just going to result in a lot more damage. And it's going to proc bleed just as fast too. Like you can spam this thing over and over again for only 11 FP and it's going to melt everything. Like obviously the closer you are, the more damage it's going to end up doing. But even at those further distances where it is safer, it can also just mess up enemies. So yeah, if you ever feel like you're running a dexterity build and lacking a projectile option, just use these things. Number 2, the Bloodfiend's Arm. This is a colossal weapon of which does get a split arcane and strength-based scaling. Now the funny thing is that you can infuse it, meaning that when you go into a bleed-based infusion, it doubles down into that arcane stat, of which gives you a B scaling and arcane with a bleed infusion, which is just unprecedented, that like never happens. And combined with the Great Club heavy attack that does a quick downward slam that leaves a blood-based AoE that also does scale with arcane, you're going to be proccing bleed on almost every single charged heavy attack, and also be doing upwards of like 50 stance damage. Yeah, this thing is broken. It's probably going to get nerfed, so enjoy it while you can. Number 1, all of the perfume bottles that can be infused, because Rolling Sparks is a broken Ash of War, does stupid amounts of damage. You throw it at the ground and then all the explosions just happen at once, and it does like over 30k, 40k damage, doesn't matter what it is, everything's just gonna die in front of you. It's just dumb. You don't even need like a specific type of build or an optimized build to this benefit of like one-shot potential. It's just going to work that way. Now, perfumes broken outside of this skill, no, they're actually kind of underpowered. They don't really get that higher damage. Their movesets are kind of slow. They don't really get good poise damage. You can't critical attack. Their other Ash of War options are kind of mediocre. So hopefully they do get like buffed alongside the Rolling Sparks nerf that's inevitable to come. That'd be kind of cool. Anyway, that's that now done. If I rushed over the last 2 weapons, that's because I don't really care to talk about the broken stuff. I've already covered them before, and I'm sure thousands of people have made videos talking about these things. Everyone knows about them already. I'd rather talk about the other stuff that's actually interesting. Anyway, as always, please do like and subscribe, because I do have a bunch more ranking videos coming out along the way. I do want to cover the seals and staffs, probably make some more build videos too. And also do follow me on Twitch, because that's where I do all of my testing. Anyway, catch you guys around. Bye.